All right, I think we can get started with the intros. We'll get started. So, hello everybody. I'm David Hahn. I'm a former CISO and operating partner with Ballistic Ventures. We are a early stage cybersecurity only firm, and this is what we call Shift Now, which is our monthly series where we feature our portfolio companies who are focused in this world of application security, DevOps, DevSecOps, whatever you want to call it. We're just calling it Shift Now because obviously there's a lot of things that you need to do right now. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ian, ask him to introduce himself, and then he'll also introduce our other guests. Ian, turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, David. Great hosting this webinar. And this version of Shift Now, I would actually like to focus on one of the areas that, again, as personally as the former CISO, much like yourself, David, I've experienced myself. And for that, I'd like to introduce a good friend and an advisor to us, Alaap Pandit. Alaap, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So my name's Alaap Pandit. I've been in security for a little over 10 years. Most recently, I helped Orca Security scale up. I joined as the 15th employee, and right now I advise a number of security companies, and Gomboc is really exciting, so I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Right on. And as I mentioned before, Ian Amit, I am a what we call a recovering CISO that started Gomboc about 2 years ago to solve one of the areas of friction that I've mentioned before. Again, the format for today's webinar is really sort of a back and forth of his version, her version, or his version of this remediation space. Basically, Alaap's got a lot of experience as a practitioner, as a coming from the technical side of things. Worked with a lot of DevOps organizations. Again, myself, I've been on the security side for over 25 years. Filled basically every role in security organizations, from pen testing, incident response, networking, you name it, I've done it, all the way up to running global organizations as a CISO. And just for the quick kind of kickoff, the chat today isn't really about theory. It's about the messy reality of aligning security and DevOps and making it actually happen, making it real. For a quick icebreaker, Alaap, do you want to share maybe a kind of a personal story or an anecdote about a time where kind of your teams clashed about cloud security from a practitioner, from a DevOps perspective? And I'll follow suit.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I've worked with very large enterprises all the way down to SMBs, and I think the commonality has always been pointing of fingers, where the SecOps is always pointing to DevOps, and the biggest friction point has always been trying to see who is at fault, who is actually being the choke point within an organization, and at the end of the day, really preventing the business value from driving forward and moving the business forward is really what all this is about. And so realizing that you're on the same team is the biggest struggle, especially because the goals don't always align. And so I think that's the biggest thing that I've seen across all the orgs that I've worked with, irrespective of the size.
Right. And again, just for the sake of sharing and breaking the ice, a funny, sad anecdote from my end as a CISO. I remember days where I used to get a weekly or monthly, I can't even remember, a report of vulnerabilities into my email. And it was a PDF file that amounted to about 800 or 900 pages of vulnerabilities, of open issues. And the sad part about it is that no one did anything about it because it was so long. It had a huge mix of criticals and highs and lows and informationals with a ton of false positives around it. And even with that, if I just looked at the criticals or highs, those were pretty much arbitrarily kind of technocratic definitions of what's critical and what's high that had complete disregard to the actual risk for the organization. So, it was really a double-edged sword because someone dumped this on my literal inbox every week, every month, whatever it is, causing me liability because now I know of those problems. And I also know that I can't really fix it because even when I did want to open a few tickets to DevOps to kind of Alaap's teams, they would either kick them back as, no, that's a false positive, or no, that's irrelevant, or yeah, sure, we'll take care of that. It's going to take us like a couple of months. So that's really kind of the frustration that stemmed my journey into the remediation. Having said that, let's dive into a little more about why security and DevOps see risk differently. From my perspective, again, I'm playing the CISO here. And I'll play the typical CISO. All right, might not be true to my personal experience, but the typical CISO, basically says, look, my job is to manage risk. All right, I only have to report on it. I don't have the capabilities to actually fix things. I don't want to fix things because I'm not equipped to do that. Even my most technical security engineers, if they make changes to infrastructure, they're going to break things, and there's DevOps to take care of that. So, DevOps is basically creating the bottleneck because they're telling me, look, dude, we don't have the bandwidth to deal with all of your security things. Make sure that you're sending over 2, 3, 5 issues at a time, every DevOps cycle, every sprint, and better make sure that they're valid, better make sure that these are the most critical ones, basically forcing me to deal with that bottleneck, to deprioritize a lot of things. And, because you're telling me I'm blocking innovation, how does that make sense? Alaap, how does that look from your end?
I mean, you're telling us to move fast from like the DevOps side, but at the end of the day, if you're pushing false positive, that's like PTSD that we've had over time. We've been ingrained into that. So we want validation, and we want the ability to validate that, yes, we can fix this without having to go through all that effort of investigating. There are 1,000 alerts to understand which are really the high magnitude and which are really just low informational that are flagged incorrectly. That becomes really difficult. And at the end of the day, you're really trying to understand where should we fit into the pipe and where should we actually fix these things without really understanding how we move as a dev team and the way that we like to function and operate. And so to the extent that you just ship a bunch of alerts to me and say, hey, I need you to fix these things, we're going to try to align them with our priorities. And it always takes a backside. That's why we ask for a short list. And so the issue with this is that it often leads to pointing of fingers, like we talked about, and understanding where should we prioritize our time and effort. And so I think it's a good thing to talk about, right? Which is, what was security slowing the deployments, or are we doing the right thing by taking our time fixing these issues so we don't break things in prod, right? What do you think about that?
Hey guys,
Totally.
I want to pause you for a second and encourage the audience. Please use the chat in the window, so I'll be monitoring that. And so, throw in all your questions and certainly comments, especially if you disagree with these guys can handle it, right? So throw it in and we'll make it interesting and we'll make it engaging. So just a reminder, please go ahead and put your questions or comments into the chat.
Right, absolutely. I was about to encourage the audience here to basically kind of point out, what frustrates you more, security slowing down deployments or DevOps ignoring vulnerabilities. And feel free to kind of throw that into the chat or have questions about that. Where I'm sure that David's going to stop us and is like, all right, deal with this question from the audience. Which again kind of leads me to the next step, which Alaap started talking about it. Who's really to blame? I mean, from my perspective, 90% of the cloud breaches are starting with a misconfiguration. And my simple and blatant question is, DevOps, why aren't you pushing code without why are you pushing code without guardrails? I mean, how hard is it to get the configuration correct? I mean, it's simple configurations. We're not even talking about business logic and application code and all those complicated things. We're talking about the foundation of how we're setting things up in the cloud.
Yeah, I think you're talking about like the infra, right? Specifically, and how this.
Yeah, exactly. That's the Capital One, the typical misconfigured S3 bucket, lack of authentication, the low-hanging fruit. Like, why do you keep getting it wrong?
So look, I mean, it's easy to see that perspective, but if you really take a broader look at the overall space of infra, it's not as simple as saying like, hey, there's a S3 bucket that's misconfigured, and why didn't you catch this? When you think about the traditional org, you have multi-cloud approach often enough. And even if you don't, you have like 300 different service offerings just from like AWS alone, for example. And every day there's at least like a few dozen lines of code that are pushed and updated. And it's impossible for the entire DevOps team to keep up to date and understand where changes are being made that could affect our infra right now, and forward look this as well. And if you think about this, if we have just AWS, that's a little more feasible to the extent that it's not hundreds of cloud accounts that we have to monitor, each of which has their own compliance frameworks that they must adhere to or specifications for the business. But then think about it from like a multi-cloud approach, right? How should we handle that? That's where it becomes more difficult, staying up to date with everything.
Well, I'm giving you, I've bought all those fancy tools, right? I've got CSPMs and CNAPs, and I'm giving you all those alerts. Like, why can't you handle those? I mean, they're pretty accurate, right? I mean, if something's misconfigured, we get the alert. We stopped opening, massive amounts of tickets because you keep telling us that you can't handle it. But where's the gap there? Why does that? And you've mentioned, hundreds of services and dozens of config options, but isn't that your job?
It's a part of the job. It's a part of the job, right? It's not the entirety of the thing. And yeah,
Right.
there are a bunch of tools that are out there that have a good value that they provide, and they give me visibility for the dev side. The issue lies in that they're not specific to like what I'm doing in my specific org. Like if you think about it more particularly from IAC perspective, infrastructure as code, it's my code. And then within my org, you as a CISO might be setting the policies for us to follow and adhere to. So we need to adhere to your guidance and your instructions, which are unique to my org. And last thing is comparing all this against, like I said, like the specific service offerings from the cloud provider and how they need to balance with the first two priorities. That's where the challenge lies. And integrating these things. This is still not simple with most of the solutions out there today. They're more point solutions that give a tip of the iceberg visibility without much depth or substance behind them. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. No, it absolutely makes sense, and I'll double click on that point, because from my perspective, the tools are providing the alerts, and they actually provide some pretty solid guidance. But you've mentioned IAC. I want to double click on that. While we're doing that, just throwing it out to the audience, if you have some thoughts around who should own the tools, is it security, is it DevOps, who should be the one that's utilizing those detection and alerting mechanisms, especially as we're talking about the move towards platform engineering, kind of, from DevOps to DevSecOps to platform engineering. Things are getting, de-siloed, things are getting a little more closer together. It would be kind of curious to hear if anyone's got opinions about, who owns the tools, who's using the tools, who's budgeting for them. Double clicking to your point, Alaap, about, the usage of infrastructure and code and really how to deal with that. I mean, automation is supposed to help with all of that. Yes, I recognize the fact that we've got tons of alerts, but even the most modern CNAPs and SOARs and sorry for throwing out all those all those different acronyms, but these things really automate a lot of that process. They automate a lot of the work. I know that from my end as a CISO, I've seen, the ability for automation tools to take thousands of alerts and do a lot of work on them, do a lot of prioritization, a lot of deduping. We're even automating the process of opening the tickets towards you. What's missing? Again, I can keep pushing alerts down your throat. Is there an automation that's missing on your end a lot, or how does that look from the DevOps side when you're dealing with that? What's the missing piece here?
Yeah, if you look at automations that have been put in place, like starting from earlier on CNAP has IAC protections and remediations that they offer. The issue is that they're very generalized in focus. For example, if there's a control check framework that failed within CIS, it's going to point it out and just say, go and make this change without being prescriptive and giving me like a button click capability. And even if it does, it doesn't have that human in the loop functionality out of box. I usually have to bake that in and put it into my flow. It's more steps, more effort, and more collaboration required when there's already friction. And then if you think about SOAR, it's security orchestration automation response. It's not developer orchestration automation response, right? Focused on the security side purely, and there are some that are saying they have a dev focus, but at the end of the day, it was built for security teams. It wasn't built for my teams, like the dev side. And
Hey guys, let me
Got it.
jump in a second. Our chat is not working, so anybody out there who is trying to, sorry about that for your frustration. So I'm going to channel our audience, and so I'm going to give you guys the questions live because I know these are the questions they're going to have with that. Okay, so let's talk about that finger pointing that Alaap was getting to right now. So does it take a breach? Something terrible to happen, and if the or you hear it in the news, right? Oh, that company that similar to us just got a breach, something like that. So a lot, you want to start with in terms of when that type of thing happens, or have you ever had anybody kind of threaten you guys, right? Which like, hey, you don't want to get into a breach or something like that, right? So does that change? I mean, kind of a carrot versus stick kind of approach.
That's a great question. I think, unfortunately, most of the time what we've seen is it takes a lot of great pain for change to happen. Now, the best places that I've seen change happen without the true pain happening is when you do like mock breaches or mock hacks to see how the team is actually handling, threat incident response and collaborating as a whole, not just from the SecOps side, but also the DevOps side. So that's the ways that I've seen it really implement and drive, forward looking before the actual breach happens. But in my experience, I've seen more often than not, the breaches is what causes the change to happen, like we've seen in Capital One and a number of other breaches. Yeah, even folks like Bybit recently, right? Ian, what do you think about that? Do you think it happens only when there's real pain felt, or do you think that there's opportunity for forward looking?
No, I definitely think that there needs to be a pain for things to happen. Now, the pain can come in different shapes and sizes. A breach is definitely one of them. And I remember the days where I used to be the most hated person in the company, walking down the halls when I was running red teams unannounced. No one knew other than the CEO, CFO, CTO, and myself in a 16,000 people company. And everyone was responding to that red team as a breach. All the way up to almost alerting the FBI when incident response really kicked in. So and again, there's great success around being able to move the needle after showing the materiality of what that means, especially when we're talking about a red team that goes in and mimics a true attacker, and more often than not, they're really abusing those misconfigurations. Other forms of pains are actually much more subtle, audits and compliance. Being able to, kind of going through an audit and not meeting the requirements and kind of kicking the can down the road and saying, I'll get it fixed for the next audit, or this should be remediated in 6 months. That's a pain. It might not be a breach, but it is going to become material in 6 or 12 months when the next audit cycle comes in. And then the fines are going to start rolling in, and the company just says, you know what, it's more worthwhile for me to invest a little bit in security, to invest a little bit in DevOps and fix those things than face those regulatory fines. So not necessarily a breach, but definitely a pain. Going back
I've seen,
to
I've
go
seen
ahead.
audits I've seen audits drive and cause pain, but I think it's really always comes down to once the teams have to collaborate and work together. The light is really shown on like what tools do we have in our stack and how are we actually operationalizing, utilizing them, and then we start to actually pick through it and say like, hey, are we actually finding true value from this, or is there overlap, or do they have the audit logs and the necessary details to show me what actions were taken, when was this found and populated, and where was it ignored or the gap felt? So I think that's also a side effect that is worth mentioning here.
That's
Yeah,
a really
Alaap,
great
let me
point.
ask one more on accountability with that. So, at the end of the day, it's a vulnerability, right? So human did that. Back to the finger pointing thing, security people want to just have it fixed, whatnot. I mean, from an engineer, there's always pride in your work. But what about like, okay, that was 3 developers ago from whatever who wrote the code. That was an open source piece. When you start getting to this, nobody really owns it. I mean, is there a bit of that? Again, in the engineering, when there's so many teams, sometimes when everybody's contributing and you really can't get to who. But then, how do you really solve problems when you don't have accountability? How do you think of that?
Right.
Yeah,
And Alaap, if I might kind of inject before you answer, because I think I have the solution. I mean, we've been talking about that shift left, right? I've been giving you tools. I've been, all those tools promised that shift left. They've been delivering, things closer and closer to the code, and I'll I'll let you answer a lot, but remember that shift left. I'm giving you the tools. What's missing there? What's kind of not bridging that gap?
Yeah, so it's a good point to David's what David said is if there's already legacy stuff that's already there, and to your point, if I already have shift left implemented in theory, yes, I should have been able to see this. The issue lies in what's already running in the infra and what's actually deployed. And to the extent that I'm being able to scan this on an ongoing basis, not just through my pipe, but also what's actually already running and deployed. And at the end of the day, if I'm not doing everything, not just the shift left, but also what's really there, there's obviously going to be gaps. And then to the accountability point, I mean, I think it really boils down to what team does it belong to that made the failure. To the extent that it was a historical hire that did this, it really needs to just be owned up by whoever the lead is. For example, if it was my team and I'm leading it, I would own up to it. And then it's about having, post-action results. How do we actually avoid this in the future? How do I collaborate with my security counterpart to make sure that this is remediated?
Got it. That's a great point. And you know what? At this point, I want to, kind of change hats a little bit and actually own up to the logos that we're carrying here, if that's okay, David. This is basically the premise of the journey that I've personally taken and Gomboc is set out to do. And I think we really narrowed it down to that space of accountability between security and DevOps. There's a vulnerability. Alaap, thank you for pointing out, shift left really takes care of that, ongoing development. But what about all the existing things that are out there? Again, my list of 900 pages of a PDF of issues, how do we deal with both things effectively at the same time? And that's essentially what we're trying to do here. We're taking an approach that says, look, yes, automation is the solution. And to Alaap's point, 300 services just on AWS, 70, 80 config options per service is just not realistically something that the best DevOps unicorn can master, not even factoring in the fact that they need to do that across 3 clouds. So there's a huge knowledge gap. That's kind of one pillar of what we're doing here at Gomboc, which is essentially, look, we're going to read the manual for you. We're going to master all those things. And we're going to utilize an automation, not just to open tickets, not just to prioritize and dedupe all those alerts, because finding issues is easy. It's really fixing them that we've kind of recognized throughout this webinar. That's really the issue. It's how to bridge that gap between the security finding, whether it's an existing issue with the architecture or something that's happening throughout the dev cycle. And what we're really doubling down on is not just getting another Gen AI tool that's going to take a lot of other people's code, whether it's good or problematic, and try to massage it and come up with a statistical model to what's right, but come up with a deterministic solution to very specific security issues, to very specific security gaps. And essentially, instead of opening a ticket, I'm giving you code. Going back to your point, Alaap, about managing that cloud infrastructure with infrastructure as code. I can't believe people still do ClickOps these days, and we're seeing a lot of movement towards IAC. Thankfully, and being able to come up and instead of telling you, hey, Alaap, I've got a bunch of tickets open for you. I know that there are issues. I have no idea what's right. I have no idea what's, how to solve them. Good luck doing research and solving them. Basically, I'll give you a diff. I'll give you a PR instead of a ticket. Here's the fix. It's deterministic. It is based on your code, first and foremost, on the cloud documentation, secondary. So I'm not going to come up with something that a Gen AI would, which we often see some, highly undocumented configuration options that are wishful thinking rather than actual functions. And the third part is, let's put David in that seat. What David wants. If David's the CISO, he should be able to say, all right, guys, this is what I require from my environment. From a security perspective, please meet those policies. And essentially being able to utilize those 3 pillars, your current IAC or developing IAC, the cloud documentation as the source of truth, and the constraints from security, and really bridge that gap. Alaap, again, you know what we do here at Gomboc. How does that resonate with modern dev teams that you've been able to work with from your perspective? I'm curious to hear.
The way, I mean, it resonates completely, mainly because it enables DevOps to be self-sufficient and not blocked before, showing PRs and actually making changes. And then from the SecOps side as well, it removes that requirement, because if you look at security teams, most often than not, they're very heavy, focused and knowledgeable on security. But then when it comes to the actual architecture and what changes need to be made from code, there's a very big gap on the technicality and how technical you must be. So it removes that gap for the SecOps side as well. It just gives them plain English. What is the actual issue? Why should you actually issue a PR? And the most important part about this is it puts the human in the loop, right? So I want to be clear with everybody. It's like, when you think about SOAR, the biggest issue with SOAR back in the day, and even still, is that it can often be more harmful than it can be helpful. And also, it's not an AI-enabled prescriptive or deterministic approach. And with using Gomboc, it automates this entire flow. So it's very beautiful when you see it in practice. I don't know another way to describe it, but it fits very nicely into organizations' workflows.
So let me push on that a little
Yeah,
bit
go ahead, David.
on the automation. You hear a lot of automation when it comes to AI enabled and losing jobs. And, I mean, do you think that's really a concern? Or, I'm sure as a technologist, you're going to say, well, but we'll create new jobs that are even more interesting. But go to that. So, yeah. I mean, is that the type of automation we're talking about, where basically there will be less, people altogether? Or how do you see that?
So for me, I don't see that there's going to be less jobs. In fact, I'm more on the optimistic approach for AI, and I believe that AI is really just another tool, like we saw back in the internet boom, where it's going to drive efficiencies for individuals, and more specifically, something like Gomboc drives efficiencies for both the DevOps and the SecOps side. By removing the friction of having to be very technical from the Sec side, that means that more people can come into the security teams where there's a clear skills gap and a human gap of headcount. And then from the DevOps side as well, it upskills them. So to the extent that they don't really need to care about security, they can literally just rely on something like Gomboc that is pinpointed and focused to release fixes for them, so they can focus on what they do best. That's the really awesome thing about AI, in my opinion. It enables folks to focus on what they like most, what they're actually intelligent and capable of, and to just automate the stuff that they don't care about or want to care about. What do you think?
I'll be even more blunt. Yeah, I'll be even more blunt and ask you. I went to school for computer science. If you would put me as a DevOps engineer and have me sit down and figure out how to fix configuration issues, I would look you in the face and say, this is not what I went to school for 4 years. This is not all the certifications and the skills that I've developed over time. I don't want to spend hours on end sifting through documentation, dealing with toil, when I could be used to build architectures, build functionality, run businesses. So to your point, Alaap, and again, sorry for being a little more blunt, but no one wants to do that job. Right now, when I'm tasking you with it, I'd be lying to myself if I'd be saying, look, this is a super important thing to do. Well, yes, from a security perspective, it's absolutely important, even if it's a low vulnerability, because we all know that those lows are going to show up in your next breach. So it's important, but it's not interesting. It's not challenging. And let's be honest, you guys, the DevOps, are the unicorns. I mean, you're for all the right reasons. You're one of the more expensive resources in a technical organization, because the burden of running the entire cloud infrastructure and the entire development operations is basically on your shoulders. And no, I don't think that's going to replace you, but I do think that's going to remove a lot of the bottlenecks that we talked about before, that are stopping the innovation right now, that are stopping our ability to deploy faster and more comprehensively, and allow you to really focus on what you went to school for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree completely.
Hey guys, let's go into in terms of okay, you have this automation in place, you're writing beautiful code. Okay, but how do you know you're actually doing the right things, right? So KPIs, statistic that, as a practitioner, what are you looking for to know that your teams are, doing what they're supposed to do, right? And then, those security guys won't bother me. So what do you need to show, right? So in terms of being, hey, we're looking good, or, something to that degree. Yeah, so give us some quantitative measures that you use to really be able to manage that.
I'll go first. I'm a big geek for metrics and measurements. Qualitative, quantitative. I've been, this was the bane of my existence as a CISO. I will focus on two metrics. The first one is how long is my backlog? All right. What is the liability that I'm carrying month over month, week over week, in terms of known valid security issues? I don't care if they're high critical, low, medium, pink, yellow, or green. All right. That's a liability that I'm carrying with me. If you can shorten that, if I can shorten that to a minimum and keep it to a minimum, that's one metric. The other one is basically, how do I shorten that? How quickly can I get that through? Which leads me to the second metric, which is MTTR, mean time to remediate. Right now, if I open a ticket, for a known issue, and I know it's going to take me at least 2 to 3 weeks to resolve it, because again, not pointing fingers, but DevOps has their own thing, and a DevOps cycle is typically 2 weeks, and I need to slide into the right moment, and it takes time to resolve it. That's not going to work. Not with the pace that tickets are piling up or alerts are piling up. So mean time to remediate needs to shrink from the current measures of weeks and months to literally minutes, at most days. Those are the two metrics that I will look at. Alaap, how did that look from your end as far as a kind of a DevOps practice?
Yeah, we also look at mean time to remediate as a metric, naturally, because we have a shared goal in that sense. The other side that we also get measured on is compliance, adherence with compliance and control frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
So like, are we actually out of violation, or are we having gaps within our upcoming audits? Because if there is any, then we are the ones who are going to be responsible for that, likely, and it's not going to be on the security team, because you probably issued a fix that we have to go and resolve. So these are some of the two biggest metrics that we're measured by. And to the extent that we can remove things from our backlog, that allows us to make sure that we don't miss other areas that we have to focus on. So mean time to remediate, if we can reduce that, anything possible, is huge. So that's a big reason why having something that gives me and my team the ability to just focus in our repo and just be where we live, as opposed to having to be in a specific dedicated security UI. It's huge. Gomboc integrates directly into our GitHub. I can just see the actual PR. Everything is just listed there. That's nice, right? Instead of having to make my team go into an interface or go into Jira, get the relevant details, then cross-reference against GitHub. It's too much going on, right? I just need to remove the friction, and so that helps me a lot with the mean time to remediate, removing that.
Alaap, I want to ask you this. There's this notion of good enough, right? So in terms of software and code is good enough. Again, you don't have to go into all your past, but have you ever had a case where you knew things went into production and there were vulnerabilities and there were problems? How do you manage that, right? And this notion that, okay, it's good enough, things like that. And then how do you negotiate that with the security teams when security wants everything to be resolved, but clearly nobody can ever do 100% remediation onto that, right? So how do you teeter that edge of it's good enough from a security standpoint, it's also good enough from a production and business standpoint? Where's that balance for you?
Yeah, it's a really good example, actually, because I have so many cases where we've come into cloud deployments where the security team says, hey, this is an exposed resource, or this is vulnerable, and you need to go and issue a fix. But then when I take a step back and I look with my team, the amount of effort that would be required to go and do that fix is like climbing a mountain. So instead of doing that, the simplest way is to try to find a compromise. And unfortunately, it's just like a Band-Aid, honestly. And Band-Aids are meant to fall off eventually, which is the truth. So it works in the interim. It gets them off my back, which is great. So I can continue to do what I need to do. And then eventually the Band-Aid comes off and we try to put a new one on. And eventually there's no more Band-Aids to apply. So we have to go and issue a fix. But that's been the experience that I've had. Mostly with dealing with these issues where you can't find a gap. What do you think? Have you had this case as well where you've run into it with the DevOps side there?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Again, the Band-Aids that you're talking about is exactly what I don't want to accomplish. I want to have something that's sustainable, that's repeatable. And to your point, that reduces the friction. I'll give you one example. And you've mentioned the word beautiful before, which really touches me in a different way, because that's feedback that we actually got from one of our customers, from one of their platform engineering managers, that literally said, this is beautiful. when they realize that they can finally have, and it goes back to your point about having a conversation between security and DevOps at the same level. It's, it really allowed security to and DevOps to open up a conversation, a little thread of comments on a fix, on a PR, and start commenting on it and discuss things in plain English at the context of an IAC fix. So that, and again, security didn't need to master Terraform and exact config options and what exactly is going on there. And DevOps, they had the context. They could just ask a simple question and say, hey, how important is this? Like, what's the context for this constraint, for this security policy? And security and DevOps just had at it. No Jira tickets, no back and forth, no extra reading, just a plain English conversation in that common thread. And that got resolved literally within minutes when they got to an understanding. And again, the context was not ticket lobbying back and forth. It was the actual code. It was the actual infrastructure, right there and then. I think, again, from my point, being able to meet DevOps where they're at is really where we need to be. It's really breaking down those silos and collaborating at a level that, but my analogy is sort of having a babble fish in my ear that allows me, the security practitioner, to take all of my security concepts and knowledge and practice, mostly from an offensive side and defensive side, and be able to converse with a DevOps engineer, at that level. Again, it's not going to teach me Terraform or Pulumi or whatever it is that you guys are using, but it enables me to have a coherent conversation and it basically allow me to give you that fix where I don't have to know the code, but I know that it is correct, that it's accurate and deterministic for your situation. And then if you have any questions on it, we can resolve that really quickly.
All right, so it's 40 minutes in, so I have to now ask the AI question because every webinar has to have an AI question go to the. So Copilot, AI writing code, less so much about, in terms of, replacing humans, but quality, from an engineering standpoint, is it good enough again, or is it far superior? You guys want to chime in on that in terms of, would you trust your Copilot to basically write your code base, and then what kind of dynamics are we dealing with when you're not dealing with a developer, you're dealing with this black box that says Copilot, and like, well, I guess it's correct. I don't know. It wrote the code. How do you guys look at that?
Yeah, I'll lead from like a DevOps perspective. I think it makes hiring very difficult, to say the least, because now we have all of these, for lack of a better way, like junior developers that were trained how to code on GPT or Copilot or other AI tools, but they didn't learn the fundamental thinking behind the frameworks and the various libraries and when is the right time to apply them or not. They're simply just chatting with an AI, trusting the output and saying, this works, which is terrifying because, to the question earlier, am I scared of AI removing jobs? No, it'll be more jobs, but that means also more, shitty code being pushed into our repos. So we need more security, if anything, but at the same time, it's a concern because we don't want to hold up releases. This also accelerates releases, which is awesome, but we need to balance the two. It becomes ever more critical now than ever before.
From my perspective, I would point out two things. One is, and Alaap, you started, touching that. You've generated code. It works. Great. Who's accountable for it? Do you own it? Can you debug it? Can you now modify it if I'm asking for a different feature? I'd question that. And the second point is, starting code from scratch is one thing. But can you unleash a generative AI on your existing infrastructure? Would you trust it to understand the constraints? Would you trust it to understand your current architecture and make changes to it in the context of security? Let me break it to you. You can't really, because again, GPT and generative AIs in general are basically trained on hordes of other people's code as examples, and they're employing a statistical model. All right, ChatGPT, Copilot, all those things are designed to basically guess what is the next thing that you want me to write. And if I'm telling you, Alaap, as an engineer, that I'm giving you a code that is statistically correct or statistically close to being correct, for what you need? What do you hear in your engineering mind?
Something's wrong and something's missing.
Exactly, that it's incorrect. By definition, if it's statistically close to something to being correct, then it's incorrect. And that's why I think that we need to deploy deterministic AI. Again, more of a decision tree model, more of a knowledge graph based model that has a real source of truth. Again, the documentation, not other people's implementation of an architecture that maybe hit or maybe didn't hit the security requirements, but the actual true cloud documentation of the ISC languages, and to my point, your code in a deterministic way, employing an AI through that is the only way to deliver accurate code that, first of all, you can actually own. And again, we will never deploy something on your behalf. We will give you the fix, and you still need to own that. You still need to, review and merge that code to your code base, because we understand you're the governor. Like you have the governance and has to make sure that you can account and have accountability for it. And again, it needs to be accurate. There's no guesswork. We cannot rely on statistical models, because at the end of the day, we're here to remove friction. And I don't want you to start chasing around and figuring out, well, that's close, but I recognize that this is kind of a co-pilot or a ChatGPT thing that I need to massage and make it work for my environment. That's my take on AI. And again, it's really finding the right tool for the right problem. Generative AI is great for a lot of different things, for writing blog posts and for generating funky images, but when it comes to engineering and generating code, not so much. We need to find a different tool. And again, generative AI is there to provide that level of accuracy and accountability.
One more note that's worth calling out on David's point about AI tools is the rampant increase in usage of cloud, right? Like if you actually take a step back and look at cloud utilization today, it's really only a few percentage points that are actually adopted. The real adoption point is still coming down the horizon. It's not saying it's not there now, but with AI tools, the utilization of SaaS solutions and cloud solutions is going to increase in organizations. And so this is also something that requires a specific solution to fix. David, you had another question.
Hey guys, so we're going to try to wrap it. So, Alaap, I'm going to ask you for your dream, whatever, 5 years from now, where do you see things going? Ian, I'm going to ask you the same thing. As the founder, I kind of know what your dreams are, but, let's say, let's look at it, further going through that. But so, Alaap, we talked about automation, you talked about AI, all these things that get to it. What's your dream in the next 5 years in terms of where you would like to see, development, engineering, and security come?
Yeah, I'd really love to see the point where, as a developer, I'm able to stay within my IDE even and be able to see, a dash within security and my dev environment in one place. So I don't have to go to a dedicated dashboard, and just being able to interface with an AI that understands my security team's, goals, what's driving them, where are they responsible for, and tries to automatically map that to what I'm responsible for. So I can just focus on my code, focus on interacting with this AI to help me with coding and achieving the business goals, rather than looking over my shoulder that Ian's gonna come screaming after me.
That's the nightmare part. Okay. So
that is the second part.
That's true. Ian, what's your dream? What's your dream? What's right with you?
Is not to have to scream and be Alaap's worst nightmare, popping over his shoulder. It really is, getting to a point where I have the certainty and the assurance that the basic foundational levels of security across my organization are taken almost for granted. That I have an automated way of closing small gaps, of being fully shift left. I'm talking about, I love Alaap's point about the IDE. Getting to interact on Git is great. My dream is to actually get, again, to Alaap's IDE, to be the smiley angel, not the little devil on the shoulder that's helping him develop secure code. And again, from a security perspective, the dream is really to do that without the burden of having to learn new policy as code languages, without having to dive deep into the intricacies of how Terraform works for Azure and GCP and AWS. I don't need to do that. I want to focus on the functional levels, on the security levels, and be able to use that language and know that that is being enforced, and have the assurance again that those things, the foundational elements, are being taken care of, so that I can deal with. And trust me, I've got a lot of other issues that I want to deal with on the business side, on the risk side. So getting rid of that is a huge accomplishment in 2, 3, 5 years.
All right, Ian, so here's your plug. So we got all the audiences saying, okay, I buy that. Okay, I want some automation too. Going, so what can Gomboc do to help all these folks here?
Very simple. Our solution is designed to exactly bridge that gap. If you want to try it out, we've got a free trial. Check out the website. It's super easy to kick that off. Couple of things. Again, I was a CISO. I know exactly what scares you guys. So there's no commitment. No one's going to chase you down. Not myself, not a salesperson. That's a personal guarantee. And it's super simple to integrate. All you need is some Git access. So get your favorite developer, or if you're, if you can get down and dirty, just connect it to a Git or clone a repo. You can see results within 20 minutes. You don't have to wait for 2 weeks or whatever it is for the product to kind of start to understand what's going on. Again, that's the beauty of deterministic. We'll find the problems and we'll deliver the fixes. We're not going to inundate you with alerts. We're going to give you the actual fix. If you like it, let's dance. If you don't, give us feedback, because that's exactly what we're here for. We're here to make sure that security is not becoming DevOps' NA, and neither DevOps is becoming security's enemy. We want to make sure that everything is seamlessly integrated, and we're removing those bottlenecks.
All right. Any last words, Alaap? Because I'm sure Ian stole all your ideas, because he got it all from you, but he's going to take all the credit for it. But that's okay, right?
Of course.
No, the only thing I'll say is it's been a pleasure working with the Gomboc team. Anybody that's on the call that's interested in a trial of the solution, that is not at all what you're used to with other orgs. Ian means it when he says a salesperson's not going to be chasing down your throat. And even if you don't want to interact with anybody from Gomboc, that's totally fine too. You can just have access. You can test out the tool for a little bit. And if you want to give feedback, that's phenomenal. Otherwise, no worries. And if you have any general questions, feel free to reach out to me, reach out to Ian. We're happy to chat, even if it's not Gomboc.
There you go. Well, we'll have all that information available, but yeah, just go onto Gomboc's website. We'll have that. So at this point, we're going to wrap this part off. And then, Ian, apparently somebody's hiding behind you. A gentleman named Roger. He's going to sneak in here. This is the magic of I don't know what this is, but Roger, do you want to step in here? There you go. All right. It's not even a deep face. This is actually Roger.
The two of us.
Yeah, Roger Thornton is our general partner and founder at Ballistic, and Roger's going to say a few words. But actually, Roger, we wanted to get you in the beginning, but why did Ballistic invest in Gomboc? Because I think that's a little bit of a context here also in terms of why do we believe this is so important and what's needed, in the development community.
Sure thing, David. First of all, both of our panelists, you guys did a great job. I would say 99% of most panel discussions are boring. You guys made it exciting. You argued and I thought brought up some phenomenal points. So great job, guys.
Thank you.
I used to be able to say that I had spent half of my career in development and engineering and half in security, but I went and got myself old. So it's a little more than half in security, but I still spent a lot of time coming up through the engineering side of the house. And even while I've been in security, I fundamentally ran development and product teams, right? I think everything you guys are talking about, sadly, is a management failure. So, this notion of, I'm going to get a great group of people, they're going to steep themselves in whatever the customer or end user, if you're an IT shop, needs, and I'm going to build great stuff for them, and I'm going to do it really fast, and I'm going to enlighten them or just delight them. That's so cool. But to do that and then wait until my security experts run all sorts of cool, sophisticated tools to show me where I made mistakes, and then fight and argue with them about whether they are that important, and then have to rework it. You don't have to be a Malcolm Baldridge award-winning TQM expert to know that that's inefficient. It's more efficient if security and development are working together from the onset, and you build something that's robust, and occasionally you find something in production, kind of the net new. Our industry's totally broken as far as that's concerned. And I completely understand that the people that run development of all shapes and sizes, their maniacal focus on delighting the customer soon is it. But we have to engage them in seeing the bigger picture. And that is, if you're working closer with security and you're working with the type of security people that actually get it, right? So they're not there to beat you over the head about some false positive or what have you, but they're really rolling up their sleeves and helping you work. You will have more capacity. You will move faster because you won't be doing rework. And if anybody doesn't know who Malcolm Baldridge is, go Google him and learn about that. It turns out building it right the first time is faster than building it wrong and redoing it. And that's what I think is at the core here. So to whatever degree awesome DevOps people and security people are doing this together, that's great. For the CISOs in the audience, I know it's hard to go talk to the development people, and they're kind of a pain in the ass, and they'll always just say, well, do you want me to do it securely, or do you want the new banking function? But the way to engage them is on their terms, not about risk and security, but getting more stuff done. And that, in the end, everything you guys talked about, that will result in better security and more capacity to get stuff done. Will requires a little bit longer term thinking. So anyway, that's my soapbox. That's why we invested. We're someday things will be built secure from the onset, and Gomboc's a big thrust in the market to make that happen.
So Roger, we talked about AI on developers. Are we going to have AI on venture capitalists who will kind of finally get rid of us, just, put on the shelf like a co-investment or something like that? Yeah, there's got to be, right?
Well,
isn't that next?
I love Alap's point earlier about if a super experienced software engineers using AI, they can be magical. If you put it in the hands of someone really inexperienced, it's a disaster. It's a disaster, and I think it'll be kind of the same in our world. Our business also basically a service business, the personal touch. So imagine, there's one firm that wants you to talk to their agent and submit everything, and then they tell you yes or no. And another one's willing to meet you, sit down and have coffee, listen to you like a human being. So it's already having an impact on our business, but I think there'll still be people. And back to that whole point about, I've had that development career, I had the security career. I don't have that many more years before I'm going to be up working on my vegetable garden.
There you go. We still got jobs for a little bit. Okay, so they're all stuck with us, or at least what we think is the real version, because this could be a deep fakes, and that's a whole other topic we won't get into. Anyway,
if you do this, but
there you go. So thank you, everybody. Alaap, thank you so much for coming on board. Ian, thank you. And then Roger, go through. Audience, sorry about the mishap with the chat, but hopefully I channeled as many of your questions as you got. We want to also let you know that this is a monthly series. So next month, our portfolio company Oligo will be going, and that's going to be another fascinating talk in terms of what they're doing. It's just phenomenal in terms of the work they're going through. So overall, this is such an important area, as Ian and Roger Alaap has been talking about here. So audience, thank you for your time. And again, any feedback for us would be great. If you want to see anything more or anything different, the recording of this will be available, and so we will also have that. So for any of the folks who missed it, or anybody that that you want to share it with, we'll be providing that soon once the AV team gets it all and brings it on, and hopefully makes me sound smarter. So that's all going to be in place. So thank you, everybody, for your time. Take care.
Thank you.
All right, cool. Thanks, guys.